Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much. Colin Tukui Tonga speaking. Have the pleasure of facilitating the conversation this evening. Palofala hi atu ke he tau matakainanga osine whanonong mai he whiawhi. Whakauela he whakalataha mai am tūru ke whanonongo whakatutalanga ke he whahi kumi ngā hua malolo sino. Koe whikau tausi ke lata moe tau matakainanga ni ngā hua he motu. Kai mame tūru koe mena hawhangi he whikau nei he tangata osi he lalang katoa. Si palofala hi atu whauela mhaki ke he whalataha mai a tau tūru he whiawhi. Wawe whakamua ke atua ko mai ke liu a tau tūru ke Whilewea. Wauela mahaki, ue tūlo. Good evening, everyone. Once again, my name is Colin Tukui Tonga. I have the pleasure of facilitating the conversation this evening. We have some fantastic speakers. I'm a fairly tough referee. They know their time is limited. If they go on over the time, we'll ring the bell, because what we want to do is give you an opportunity to ask questions at the end. We want to be able to answer as many questions as we are able. We may not be able to do so for all of your questions, but hopefully we'll do as many as we can. For those of you who are speaking and who intend to ask a question, please note that the session is recorded. These are learning events. We've had a few sessions with our friends in Tonga. And this is something we undertake from the University of Auckland Centre for Pacific and Global Health, Te Potoko Ora a Kiwa, the Centre for Pacific and Global Health. Our brief, our purpose, our reason for existing is to support research and research capacity building in New Zealand and around the region. So exciting for us. This is the first one for and with friends from Niue. If you, I assume you can all hear me. If you have a question or a comment, use the chat function, and the team is monitoring that, and we'll try and get as many of the questions covered as possible. If not, then you can email us directly and we'll try and respond. So thank you very much for joining us this evening, and we'll get underway. We have firstly the Honourable Sonia Talangi making a statement which we will play for you. She's traveling, I understand, and can't join us today. And then I'll introduce the other speakers as we progress this evening. The ministerial statement is just over 8 minutes, so bear with us. We'll start with that. And once again, thank you very much for joining us. Lois? Can people hear the minister?
No.
Again.
Sorry.
You might have to enable the audio.
Olofalayetu and Bula from Fiji. We really need to stop meeting like this, but it's always a pleasure and a privilege to support these types of initiatives. To my Director of Health and the team behind you, Renobeki Mo McCready, congratulations and thank you so much, team, for putting this together. Well done. To Sir Dr. Colin Tukui Tonga and your team at the University of Auckland, Bowilahi, thank you so much for your ongoing support. It's greatly appreciated. I also wish to acknowledge and congratulate you, sir. To you, Sir Dr. Colin Tukui Tonga and Professor Willie Nosa. Congratulations on your recent promotions to Professor at the University of Auckland. We couldn't be more proud. Now, making these opening remarks hits a little bit different compared to October last year in our first symposium. I'm not an academic researcher. I'm not a scientific researcher. I'm just an island girl trying to live her best life on our little piece of paradise called Niue. But research, for Niue, by Niue, why it matters. How can we as Niuean people contribute to research about our Niue? I think we're a little bit hard on ourselves sometimes. We know more than we give ourselves credit. And sometimes we only realize this after somebody else comes and tells us. But many a time we can be overlooked, we can be undermined, but no one knows our Niue like we do. Now, if you don't know, I am currently undertaking the Wangahau Niue certificate course offered by the University of South Pacific at the Niue campus. I am 2 papers down with 4 to go. And as with all courses, there's a little bit of research involved. Hello, I'm a researcher too, even if at a very low level. So for my paper on traditional practices, I chose hair cuttings and ear piercing ceremonies. I skimmed the book, Niue, the Island and Its People, by Percy Smith. Percy Smith was basically the very first New Zealand High Commissioner to Niue in 1901. There was no mention of either ceremony in his book. But then I came to find that he was only on island for about 4 months. So I turned to the History and Traditions of Niue, written by Edwin Loeb. Many regard this as the highest or the most credible source of Niue history. He came to Niue a good 20 years after Smith, but then I found out he was only on island for about 7 months, or almost 7 months. In his book, there is mention of the ear piercing ceremony, but no mention of the hair cutting ceremony. And with the ear piercing ceremony, it is for both girls and boys. Now, maybe he personally witnessed some of the ceremonies, because maybe he witnessed the siales and the monanga teeth being used in the ear perforations in the ceremonies. But I wouldn't put it past the cheeky fellow who wanted to embellish our practices. I don't know. I can only reflect on my own experiences piercing my ears and how impractical and painful it all sounds. But I digress. For my research, I have one writer from Britain with a New Zealand Māori lens who came to Niue for 4 months. Then I have an American writer who resided in Niue for almost 7 months. Well, if anything, I would put my money on the 2 Englishmen or two of the first London missionaries that came to Niue, Reverend George Laws, who lived in Niue for 11 years, or Reverend Frank Laws, who lived in Niue for 42 years. Years, not months. We also know that Reverend Frank Laws understood and spoke our language fluently, as he and his wife Sarah went and visited our Niuean soldiers when they were at the London hospital during World War I. The chant I used in the beginning is quoted directly from Loeb's book and uses the word whakawhahina. I can't recall that word being used outside of this chant, but maybe my exposure to the word is limited. I have, however, experienced a handwritten U looking like an N and vice versa. Whakawhahi ua makes more sense once you give it a good hard look and think about it. But only Niueans will appreciate it. Only Niueans will know this. If you really think about it, there are things that only we can do, and we have to think about our children who will follow. By Niue, for Niue. In August 2022, the Laws family presented the Laws Family Bible and family photos to the care of Taonga Niue. What a treasure. I hope we have copies safely stored in New Zealand and Britain, because we have such a harsh environment in Niue. and we have limited resources and limited people to help. But I wonder what else is stored around the world, as I know the Laws family took gifts and other artifacts back to England, as I've found online, instruments for making pia, even spears, discussed on an antique roadshow clip that I have forwarded to the director, who may share at her leisure. In the first symposium, I mentioned a Niuean who contributed significantly to the Australian cinema and cricket fields. While not strictly Niuean, Herbert Bertie Nicholas's father, Frank, was born on Niue. His uncle Llewellyn married Lupo Kulukimata from Awasali, and their descendants continue to live in Niue. Willie and Sarah Sariteri, Hivi and Safari Puheke. I am the descendant of his naughty Uncle George. But if you want to know more, I have the newspaper clipping from the Australian High Commission, which was provided by my auntie, Olga Wilson. There is a plethora of information, artifacts, and literature about Niue that we're not fully aware of. We have Niueans now in New Zealand, Australia, Hawaii, where the Bishop Museum is concerned, and London. We have people that may be able to or have actually seen our stories and our heritage outside of Niue. We cannot have everything returned to Niue as we battle a harsh environment, but we can start cataloguing and centralising our knowledge into Niue. We can build on things in Niue, such as through the Cool Roofing Project. But there is ample more to be explored, built on from our environment to our culture, from our health to our history, because no one knows Niue like we do, and no one will care, no one will fight, and no one will love her like we will. So let's continue to hold the line and keep together, to keep our fire bright and sustaining for all that will follow, for our children to build on, like we are doing from those that have gone before us. O we tulogi hamtulu to maho, o we tulogi hamtulu manakumut, o we tulogi hamtulu he bailama, hamtulu gito hubri o liebe koto toa haniwe, nukututa, pakahobut. Ke tu tangarai para whanoa hea tua ki te torosi. Ke tu tō kanga mui te ke awha Niue. Niue ki mnuena, i hawe whāroto, whauela i mahaki.
Thank you, Lois. Wauelahi Minister, I learned a few things. I've been one of the people that uses lobe. Clearly, I need to revisit my use of Edwin Loeb. Anyhow, thank you very much, Minister. She raised some very good points there. My pleasure now to invite and introduce our honorary Niuean Professor Judith McCool. You'll forgive me if I'm going to be economical with the introductions, because we're going to run out of time. But Jude is a close friend, a strong ally, champion for developing skills in Pacific young people. And it's our pleasure now to invite you, Jude, to share with us your thoughts on why research matters. Just briefly, for people listening in, this will have a health focus, a medical and health focus. It is our hope over time that we would broaden this out to Niue knowledge more broadly. But for now, you have to be patient with us, and we'll focus on health. Jude, over to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Colin. Whakalofa lahi atu, and thank you, Honourable Minister, for the opening. I understand it's recorded, but it was a really important opening session, and I think it frames this evening's conversation, talanoa, really nicely. I'm just going to share some slides. If they come up, let me know. And how's that, everyone? Is that good?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, so look, I've under strict instructions from Sir Colin to be very brief, which is quite a challenge for me, as Colin and others know, because I do love to talk, but particularly I feel really passionate about, and I feel really honoured to be invited to talk a little bit, 15 minutes, about why Niuean health workers, clinicians, community workers, people involved in Niue society broadly should be involved in research. And I just want to open up by saying, just as Colin mentions, this is about health, but actually I first came to research not originally from a health background. My background is in social sciences. I did a sociology degree. And I was just really interested in it. And actually, I didn't start my degree till I was perhaps a little bit older than my contemporaries. But I was just really interested in people, and I was interested in the way they think and the way they make decisions about their behaviors. So on that basis, I just, whoops, am I gonna? So I really want to focus on why it's incredibly important that everyone has a chance to participate in research. I think it's often positioned as something really special, like only academics or scientists can do it. It requires a whole set of very, very specialized skills that take many years to cultivate. But that's actually not the case. Everyone can get involved. And I think what is most important, taken the message from the opening session, was it is particularly important for people who, for research questions to be generated from within the context. So essentially what I mean by that is that research undertaken by clinicians or nurses, healthcare workers, absolutely makes a difference. And it's far more likely to be relevant and meaningful and have an impact than a research question perhaps generated by a curious outsider, somebody who is curious about how things roll in Niue, doesn't have no value, but it doesn't bring the integrity and the value that research questions that are generated from being in the environment and knowing what matters to your people, your communities. You know your people best. And I think that's number one. So context is incredibly important. I remember once being involved in a piece of research. I had to jump onto a project that was halfway through. Somebody had to take some leave, and I was asked to participate in a research project about drowning, essentially about people's perceptions of risk of drowning. And I, at that point, didn't know how to swim, which is interesting because I now love swimming. And I didn't know anything about drowning behavior or anything like that. But what was most relevant, I think, for my involvement in this research was that I was incredibly interested and curious about why people do the things they do when they go into seawater, into the oceans and the beaches around Auckland. So you don't have to be an expert in the topic. You have to have a curiosity, most of all. The thing also that's really important is that you're the most closest to your patients, your friends, and your family. And that's where the most, I think, interesting and important priority research questions come from. So we don't just look at academic articles. We don't just read scientific reports to generate questions. We generate research questions by actually reflecting on our clinical practice, by listening to the conversations that are going around our dinner table and asking, why are people thinking like that? Why are they behaving like that? What is driving it? Why are patients not turning up, etc.? So those are the kind of instigators to research questions. It's not actually that scientific in that way. It's actually about a curiosity. And in particular, as I say, Niuean-led research is particularly important. It has a unique value and impact. It speaks to what is most needed and is what's most interesting and relevant for the Niuean context. So that's in terms of why Niuean-led research is particularly important. Another point I want to make is research, I think, is an incredibly creative, enjoyable. It's hard going sometimes because it can take some time to execute, but it's the most productive and incredibly enjoyable when undertaken as a team. So one thing, when we hopefully conduct future sessions, we can talk about the value of and what you bring when you undertake a research question as a team, because everyone contributes something quite distinctive. But essentially, research is around coming up with or thinking about a question and then designing, and we'll talk about that in a moment, but it takes time, it takes motivation, it takes delegation, and it takes different perspectives. So who needs to get involved in research? And I, again, come back to the point that actually the most interesting research groups that I've worked with are people or groups that bring different perspectives from around a particular question. But essentially, the most important reason why we need research and why Niue needs research, and particularly research led by local healthcare workers, people working in various sectors of Niue government and social society, is that it can lead to improved patient outcomes. Essentially, that's the main reason why, and particularly in health research, we're interested in undertaking it. We like doing research because we learn new things, we understand things from a different perspective. But I think in an environment where time and resources are scarce, having a really clear purpose for your research, and mostly that's around improving patient outcomes, is a really good starting point. So research the value, again, it helps us really focus where we put our efforts, how we can improve a patient experience, how we can use those resources really carefully. For example, if we draw upon an existing collection of really routinely collected data and understand just by describing what's going on in that data, so who's turning up to clinic, who's not turning up to clinic, how can we kind of generate a bit of a profile of people who are not turning up to clinic, we're better off in terms of how we target our resources to perhaps engage with that group, figure out what is going on with them as to why they're not, or their HbA1c levels are lower or higher, for example. So again, it helps us use our resources really carefully and make sure that we, again, continually improve the services that we're providing. Briefly about funding. Funding is always, you often think about research and in the same breath you always talk about funding. I think the fantastic thing about research in this current environment that we're moving into is that we've got such rich data that is just sitting in files, essentially, on our computers. And if we become more systematic and more thorough in how we collect clinical data that we routinely collect anyway, that is the basis of your research. That can be used then to answer really important questions to improve patient care. Because applying for research funding, always possible, always encouraged, and indeed collaborations are often very successful, or can be successful in getting funding from external agencies, but typically it's pretty scarce. So using existing or secondary or routinely collected data is something that we are going to perhaps focus a little bit more on in later sessions. So basically, what are the priorities? And I think, for improving health and well-being in Niue, or what questions come to mind when you reflect on your practice? So that's kind of how we start. And as I said earlier, it's not so much, again, you've gone and done some study and you spent hours in a library figuring out your research question. Your research questions are what you see when you walk into the clinic, and what you hear when you're having a meal with your family or sitting down with your children. For example, I mean, these are research questions that can come to mind. What is the prevalence of depression, anxiety amongst Niuean adults living in Niue? And that is a piece of work that will be, and our PhD student will be working on later this year. So these are really important questions. We need to know what the prevalence of depression and anxiety is in order to be able to generate and orient services to meet that need. We also got some work underway here in New Zealand looking at how young people think about and what they know about infectious diseases. Again, really quite a simple piece of research, not simple to execute, but the question is really quite straightforward. How do young people think about, what do they know? What do they know about the symptoms? What are the types of behaviors that they do when they think they might have something like an infectious disease or a skin infection or otherwise. We need to know that because it's really important in order to reshape how we respond. Again, other research questions. These are things that have direct impact on changing behaviors or changing and shifting how we respond to particular health challenges. So again, I guess the point I'm trying to make is really, really simple questions that are really important. And if you note that I'm talking about a research question now, I'm not even talking about the study design and how you collect the data and analyze it. All of that flows from a question, and the question has to come from the context, has to make sense, has to be meaningful, has to be relevant, and ideally has to then be able to be translated into, and we will talk about that in another session, how do you actually answer that question? And this is just the most simple, linear, and of course we know that nothing is perfectly sequential in life like this, or not many things, but this is what I often think about. And we often have an idea, like a curiosity. I mean, I'm really interested in young people, how they think and how they behave and how they respond to particularly social media and popular culture imagery. That's something that I've always been kind of curious about. And I formulate an idea, and I might do a bit of a review of what others have written about this topic. And on that basis, I start to formulate my research question. And in this case, it could be, you know, how do young people interpret or make sense of smoking imagery in film, as my very original project many years ago, or how do young people think about infectious diseases? What do they know? Only at that point do you start to think about how you might design the study. And when I mean design, I'm meaning, do you do interviews? Do you do talanoa? Do you do a survey? Do we just analyze documents in order to answer that question? And then we go through the remainder of those stages of collecting the data, analyzing it, and writing it up. So that's your kind of really basic research process that pretty much most projects, one way or another, go through. But what we're really focusing on today is just having that curiosity and thinking about your environment and your clinical environment with a curious mind, and knowing that you know your patients and your population and your community better than anyone, despite how much money they bring with them, how much expertise they might have in research. You are best placed to make those and think about those research questions. So really briefly, and I hope I'm in time, Colin, ding a bell if I'm not, but I basically can't speak highly enough of the importance of building those skills over time, forming teams to conduct research that ensures that your community benefits from that research directly. It is not research findings that is taken away from Niue and used for other populations. It's not just for publication. It's not just for kudos. It's actually about directly relevant solutions and improvements to your community. Research led by Niueans in Niue or in Niueans here in New Zealand can have regional and global impact. So this is, again, really important. It's not just to benefit directly your community, which is number one, the priority, but there's lots of lessons learned from how did you change things that other populations have really struggled to change or make improvements with. What was different about what you did and with your population to shift behaviors? That's really interesting and really valuable. And that's why we encourage people to write. It's not just to tick the box for an academic. It's actually because we need other people to learn when things go well, but also when research doesn't go well. I really, again, find people you really like working with, work in small, ideally multidisciplinary teams. That's really satisfying. It means that you come together, you share ideas, and you're feeling like you're part of a group. You're not on your own. Research is complex. It can have some frustrating moments when things don't go perfectly smoothly, and there's nothing like an awesome team around you to keep that motivation up. Again, keep reiterating the point about asking relevant, practical questions. Keep the questions small. Sometimes I often find that people try and solve an entire huge problem, but actually you just want to take a piece of a problem and understand that first, and then you can build on it as you go further into the area. And again, the study design, how it's conducted, is driven by the research question, thinking about how much time you've got. Again, everyone's really busy, how much resources you've got at hand, whether you've got funding, whether you've got actually no funding, you just got to take down data that you've got on your in your database. And to me, they're really important. So it has to be really practical. There's nothing more frustrating than taking off more than you can manage or anyone can manage and not seeing it through to the end. So really small, realistic projects are the most satisfying and can have the biggest impact, and typically don't cost as much. Away. Thank you.
All right, lahi, Jude. Thank you very much. Fantastic. We won't take any questions right now. We'll have all the presentations and then we'll take questions as we have time. Thank you very much, Professor McCall. Fantastic. Pleasure now to invite Mrs. Minerva Ikimau to share with us her thoughts. Minerva is the Director of Health in Niue, plays a key role in shaping policies and strategies for Niue, including the renewal of the Niue Health Strategic Plan. Minerva's asked us to help and contribute to developing a research function for Niue. So, Minerva, Olafatu.
Falafalaiatu, Sir Colin. Falafalaiatu foki gada tolos here fiafine. I'll just bring up my slide here to make sure that it is working. Can you see my slides?
Yep.
Perfect.
Good.
E whamua liwaki ni e do whaue me nawa makaheki kia ia ki han falafano mwelewe ki an gada tolos. Thank you very much for this opportunity this evening to come together really to have this webinar. To my healthcare staff and colleagues here in Niue, friends, colleagues, guests, near and far. I know we're joining. We had lots of interest as far as Philippines and Canada. Warm Pacific greetings to you all. I'd also like to take the opportunity to acknowledge our partners in this adventure for us, Sir Colin Tukitonga and his team from University of Auckland. Thank you. And last but not least, I want to acknowledge Dr. Leroy for taking upon himself this challenge to wear the mantle of research lead for the Department of Health, and hopefully be the trailblazer for research here in Niue to help inspire others. I'm really just here to coordinate and facilitate and help. So all in all, this webinar is quite unique and exhilarating for us. Research is not a new concept, and our audience this evening varies from novices that are interested in learning more about research to experts in the field. But research here in Niue that is driven by Niueans, both local and abroad, is an exciting space to be in. So for the purpose of my presentation this evening, and to address the statement or the theme of our webinar this evening, which is research for Niue, by Niue, and why it matters, I will liken research to a bus. So this will become more apparent as I progress throughout the presentation and tie it all neatly at the end. So please bear with me. The modern day light bulb or the electric light did not come from the continuous improvement or use of candles. And so it is with research. New information, ideas, methodologies, technology, etc. would not have been available had it not been through the continuous learning, which required commitment, resilience, and continuously moving towards the ideal self. So if the question is asked, what is the ideal self for Niue? You would most likely get a range of different perspectives from macro, meso, and micro levels. And given that a large diaspora of Niueans live overseas, local and international perspectives as well. And depending on what lens is used, this could be health, political, social, economical, or legislative in nature. And this is just to mention a few. But the context of research here in Niue is this. We are extremely fortunate that there is an interest to do research in Niue, about Niue, for Niue, not only by non-Niueans, but by our own Niueans as well. And although Niue is a small drop in the South Pacific Ocean, All 261 square kilometers of it have a wealth of information that is not only useful in our pursuit of excellence, but also useful for the pursuit of excellence across the Blue Pacific and beyond. So in the great big world of research, research that is about Niue, for Niue, and by Niue is a very small pool in comparison. There is a lot of untapped potential and monumental capacity for Niue to be more prominent and confident in our ability to drive research that is meaningful and purposeful for effective and evidence-based decision-making. And to truly understand the potential or scope of research here in Niue, not only in health, but across the island, I need to set the scene to provide the context in which it would sit in. Niue has a population of 1,689, and with a population this small, the workforce and human resources to do business and keep the wheels turning is much smaller. And then you add into the mix, our workforce is an aging one. So with a small and aging workforce, many wear multiple hats to ensure that the work that needs to be done is done. Imagine now, we come along and we add research as part and parcel of running concurrently to business as usual. We very much run the risk of being laughed out the door. And most likely that could be our reality. So unless it is built into the systems here, there is just no time, capacity, or expertise to do this. Hence, majority, not all, of research is done and led by external parties in collaboration with local entities. Research by Niue, for Niue, more so here on the island of Niue, is very much uncharted territory. It's not to say research has never been done here on Niue, about Niue, by Niueans, far from it. This is about research becoming an integral part in our business as usual here on the island. This is very much about using our research to map our direction of travel towards our most ideal self in the pursuit of excellence. The famous quote by Lao Tzu, a brilliant Chinese philosopher, and we all know this one: you give a man to fish, feed him for a day, teach a man to fish, feed him for a lifetime. So it is with research. It is important that not only do we learn the skills, the knowledge, and the technical expertise to be able to do the research for ourselves by our own, but to also be inspired and confident to do it and be our own drivers. Encouraging and inspiring Niueans to do research is to first break down the wall that research is not this vague concept that is beyond our scope and best left to the experts, but rather, like we have done this evening, partnering with the experts, and in this case, University of Auckland, to equip us with the tools of the trade to do research. And it will be very much like learning from our driving instructors, equipping us with the tools in which we can tell our own stories. There are outstanding Niuean academics who have conducted research and documented our histories and culture and our stories. The opportunities and tendrils of research that can be done here on Niue by Niue, even through supporting Niue, seeps across a multitude of areas. The capacity and investment in collaborative efforts cannot be emphasized enough. But in the broader research landscape, data sovereignty plays a crucial role in ensuring that data is managed in compliance with local laws, which can be essential for protecting sensitive and Indigenous information. This impacts how data is shared and utilized across borders. Indigenous data sovereignty asserts the rights of Indigenous people, us, to govern the collection, ownership, and application of our own data. The United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples reaffirms the right of Indigenous peoples around the world to access and control data about their people, territories, lifeways, and resources. Rooted in this, of course, is the inherent sovereign rights concerned with recognizing of Indigenous peoples' rights and interests in data and enhancing our own control of data to which they are related or linked to. So this concept and emerging discourse of Indigenous data sovereignty and the importance of Indigenous data governance to support Indigenous decision-making and control of data delves into reimagining how research is done, reimagining researchers and their approach, reimagining research governance, all with an Indigenous lens. And so it is with us here in Niue. There is a significant potential and need to, one, reshape the landscape and process of research here in Niue, for Niue, and two, establish the foundations of research governance that is grounded in Indigenous data sovereignty. There is a lot to learn and there's a lot to be said about Niue, and who better to tell our stories and chart our roadmaps other than ourselves using our own paradigms. So overall, it can be said that changing and reshaping the landscape of research in Niue is a form of disruptive innovation. It's embracing the concept of research as being part and parcel of the business as usual and understanding the opportunity that its disruption presents, which is the creation of a new value network. Disruptive innovations often answer problems we didn't know we had. So if research is the bus and our destination here on Niue is our most ideal self, and I'm talking not only about health, but across the island as well, in the pursuit of excellence, it's about being the drivers of our own bus. It's being comfortable and confident to be in the driver's seat. But we need believers, champions, and drivers of research because we can't be drivers of our own bus if we continue to defend the usual way of doing business. In the pursuit of learning and growth, it is learning how to drive the bus. It's learning from our driving instructors, for example, University of Auckland here, the road code, if you will, of research. And last but not least, in the pursuit of Indigenous data sovereignty, it's about owning the bus. As we all would be aware of, there's a certain sense of freedom when it comes with owning your own vehicle. It's the freedom to choose your direction of travel. It's the freedom to come and go wherever you want and when you want to. So owning the bus here is really, really important.
Fantastic, Manoa Whakawelahi. Like your examples and, how you described it. It's very good. Just one point, you've referred quite a bit to data sovereignty. There are two standout issues already beyond the other things would be, one is data sovereignty, and there's been quite a lot of work here in New Zealand, particularly by Māori researchers that define data sovereignty, and in your case, it'd be something that we want to help you craft earlier in the day about who has access to data and purpose and so on. And related to that, of course, is the ethics of research. You need a process for considering, particularly research by non-Niueans. A couple of things on our to-do list, but thank you very much. Fantastic. Pleasure now to invite Dr. Jess Parsisi to share with us her presentation. Jess is a lecturer in Pacific Studies at Te Tumu, the School of Māori, Pacific and Indigenous Studies at the University of Otago. Her research focuses on health, well-being, climate change, and the New Zealand realm. Jess has developed the Hiapo methodology and Niue-centered approach, emphasizing unique experiences, culture, and language of Niue. Just invite you now to share your presentation with us. Whakawelahi. Are you there, Jess?
Yeah.
Long on the
Yeah.
Okay. Over to you. Over to you. Thanks.
Yeah, probably. Whakalofa howhiwhi atu kia matulu osi. Whakauelahi to the organisers and to the other speakers this afternoon. I'm zooming in from Otipoti, and I make acknowledgements to Kaitahu, Kati Māmoe and Waitaha as mana whenua here. It's a privilege to be here, and a little bit I feel like the humanities scholar that snuck round the back into the webinar, because I'm not from a health background, and I currently don't sit in a health background either. So it's nice. It's nice to add that kind of elemental balance to the conversation. I'll also try not to get off track too much, but not too many promises there. So I'm the daughter of Ben Pasisi. That's a picture of my mum and dad on the right. They're probably pretty happy because it's a picture when I gave them my first paycheck from when I started my postdoc job. My dad is the son of Leala Sia Limata and Matangi Pasisi from Mutalo. There's my family house in the top right. And our family's from kind of Mutalo and Hikutavaki, village-wise. And I would disagree with Colin. I think Mutalo was the best at Holonga, even though I wasn't there. So I'm attempting to squish my roughly 300-page PhD thesis into a highlights reel, with some extra bits about my postdoc and current research, which are also focused on Niue. With the knowledge that at least for the thesis, it's publicly accessible. So if anyone's looking for some late night reading, you're more than welcome to search that online. I will say that my dad has actually read my thesis. He fell asleep a couple of times, but he assured me that it was a four-call thing, not a reflection on the work. So this thesis happened across 2015 and 2019, kind of the years in between there. And it was around 6 trips to Niue for me and 2 stints working as an intern at Taonga Niue. I'm forever grateful to Moira Inetama and the team for letting a very green researcher work alongside them. I received a doctoral research scholarship from Waikato, and I also took some money from MFAT. I got a fieldwork scholarship for funding as well. The thesis centered on the questions of how Niue women conceptualize and perceive climate change in Niue, how we pay attention to women's narratives in ways that are culturally specific and appropriate. There was a lot of research at the time that indicated that the burden of negative impacts relating to climate change would overwhelmingly be on Indigenous people and women and children in particular. This next image, comes from the University of Waikato Library display during Niue Language Week, I think in 2018. Now, even though I had given them a list, right, of all the Niue written texts that they had in their collection, the way they decided to kind of do their display was with all of these books, right? Only one of which is about Niue, and it's the Margaret Pointer book, unfortunately. And the rest are about kind of climate change, right? So in my thesis, this is what's happening around at the time, where there's knowledge of, or there's examples of Niue written work, as kind of Minister Talangi has already talked about. It's sitting there, right? It's just not being engaged with. And part of the reason that it's not being engaged with is because non-Niue people, for whatever reason, can't see it, right? They very rarely engage with it. And so that's what my thesis kind of sought to overcome, right? So I'm sitting, as I'm doing my thesis work, at the intersections of management studies, so in business, but also Pacific studies. Now, it ends up leaning more heavily in Pacific studies because of the critical work that is possible from that discipline. In part because Pacific studies pushes us to consider kind of Indigenous perspectives, Indigenous uses of knowledge, and being in conversation with these kind of wider Indigenous networks, right? Niue-centered research is obviously important for Niue people, but it can also sit within and connect with other Indigenous research And in these connections, it's possible to leverage greater resources and capacity to instigate change and innovation that challenges, I've written dumb governments and racist institutions, but I think I've forgotten to like turn the academic lenses on that. I'm interested, right? So I'm deeply interested in the specificities of Niue women's stories. And I desperately want to not have to cite only Loeb, Smith, or Pointer. So in order to do that, I developed the Hiapo methodology. And within this methodology, it becomes a Niue-specific approach to research that centers research being Niue-led, but also broadens the scope of academic sources of Niue knowledge, drawing intentionally from multiple sources, in my case, our written, visual, and oral repositories. To empower Niue women's stories, I foregrounded the wider Niue canon of literature that includes academic work published by people like Terry Chapman, Billy Nosa, collaborative articles by Moni Tonghai and Colin, obviously, master's dissertations by Leo Vayer, Darcel Apelu, and many others. So even though it's not necessarily centered on climate change or women, recognizing the broader landscape of Niue academic work sets a platform for engaging with Niue perspectives more directly. I also went deeper into periodicals like Tohitala, or the Niue's newsletter, which honestly I think is one of our most overlooked knowledge sources. So before we have texts like Niue, A History of the Island by Chapman, Etuata, Hiko, and all of the crew, we have these kind of stories that pop up, right? Letters to editor or particular kind of columns that center on Niue origin stories, for example. So we have the likes of Ulu Angamotsu from Mutalo, Solomona from Alofi, Taue he Tangaloa of Avasele, Papitalangi, and Patutoe of Lakipa, writing up a storm about Niue origins, some of which connect with stories written in the Talaho Niue, which is the London Missionary Society periodical that had Niue missionaries writing these kind of talatuai or stories of old. And some of those stories are the ones that actually end up being translated into Loeb's work. And some of them he cites well or references well. Others of them he doesn't cite very, very well at all or translate very well. So all of this is in the kind of background, right? And then when I'm talking about visual repositories, one of the forms that I focused on in my thesis was using photographs, right? The way that we've documented Niue life, Niue experience, in particular photographs. And for me in particular, I had ones from my grandmother, who I never met, but there's pictures of her and my dad's oldest brother, Uto, getting ready to come across to New Zealand for education, with one of the ships in the background. Importantly, the stories that kind of are evoked from images as well as recorded in them provide these platforms with platforms to engage with Niue experience. And so to foreground Niue women's voices, it was critical to center all of what is possible to find in relation to Niue culture, identity, and worldview. Paying attention to ancestral stories of women like Fisingaulu or Matangini Fale, Hina or Hake Hetoa, or writing by the likes of Malama Head, Samoa Tonga Kilo, and others, all strengthened the arguments that I could then make about being exclusive to Niue women as knowledge holders in their own right. In the thesis, I had 12 women who contributed to the research, and each story is given its own place within the text. What started out as questions about climate change always spread off and went off into conversations about ways of living, being in the environment, learning from parents and grandparents, experiences of movement and leadership, and other roles within their community, and so much more. The women featured in the thesis did not all agree what climate change is, or even whether it existed or not. But importantly, that wasn't the kind of useful thing in having the conversations themselves. And actually, it's a reminder that phrases like climate change can be discarded, or can be or might not be useful in our understandings of the knowledge that we hold more deeply. So it's important not to confuse the imposition of a foreign term or framing within the vastness of Niue worlds and worldviews. And I think that more generally of research as well. It's incredible and useful to draw on foreign and other kind of knowledge systems, but it's not the only way that we can understand our knowledge. Interestingly, although people knew I was doing a project about Niue women, I was still told or taken or introduced to many Niue men to talk with. And I ended up including parts of these conversations in a kind of community repository of knowledge, in part to recognize that within Niue discussions of gender, that focusing on one does not necessarily necessitate making others invisible. So going deeper into gender roles in Niue, it becomes clear very quickly that while there are gendered domains, there's also a blurriness or fluidity in how people move, adapt, and are self-determining across all aspects of their lives. Perhaps most strikingly was how Niue knowledge came to be at the center of these women's stories about climate change, and yet was often seen as something that was taken for granted. People would lament how elder generations were moving on and so many stories were being lost. So in doing this research, I learned that Niue was massive, way too big for a single thesis, but also the work of Niue people was so poorly recognized in the academy. So it sparked what continues to be a career where I get to do research that is mostly entirely focused on Niue. And that's perhaps a segue into my postdoc, which was funded by the Health Research Council of New Zealand. And it looked at Niue people's conceptualizations of happiness. Again, I used the Hiapo methodology to guide the research and seek multiple Niue reference points to answer questions about how we understand what happiness is, what it looks like in our everyday lives, and what we value, or what value we place on happiness. In collating information about happiness for tangata Niue, the research project set new precedents in where Indigenous people start conversations about their health and well-being. Questions such as what makes you happy, or what does happiness mean to you, are seldom part of the experiences tangata Niue have with health research. And yet, many elders of this project clearly identified happiness, specifically the happiness of their children, to be a key driver in their own lives. In fact, most Niue people interviewed placed a high value on happiness in their lives, but what that looks like and how it is prioritized varied. So very briefly, some common themes from where Niue people find happiness included, of course, Niue Kai, spirituality, religious spaces, family relationships and identity, particularly being with each other, having family or community connections, places to showcase Niue pride or identity, happiness in acts of service, helpfulness, usefulness, happiness in Niue learning and knowledge, and shared memories and storytelling, specifically intergenerationally, happiness in laughter, cheekiness, and pranks, happiness in wakaho, happiness in being home, specifically being in Niue on the island, happiness in the wisdom of elders, and also happiness in Niue time. Niue time is something I like to put forward as similar to island time, right? Not in that it takes on these kinds of ideas of lateness, but actually of the importance of presence, the importance of spending time with people, not necessarily being kind of confined by Western time. So in this project, I got to take 5 multi-generational groups of tautangata Niue home to Niue. For some, it was their first time. I also collaborated with Niue educators, artists, and researchers to create experiences and opportunities to engage with Niue knowledge. The flow-on impacts of this style of research are difficult to quantify, but are so significant in the trajectory of positive-oriented Niue-driven research. And more importantly for me, it's also really important for forging relationships between Niue diaspora and those on island. The Happiness Project also enabled or spurred the establishment of Matale Taume, a collective of Niue artists, scholars, and people with just way too many hats to name, that ran the first Niue Knowledge Symposium in Tamaki in 2022. And more recently, a Niue Knowledge Conference in Niue last year. Matale Taume was simply created to celebrate Niue knowledge. It's about enabling intergenerational knowledge sharing and creating spaces for Niue to Niue connections, whether it's through language, practice, or other forms. Our ability to come together and learn from each other has immense valuable. And being mindful of time. Here's some cool photos from my master's project, which I'll talk about another time. So all of my research has centered on relationships with people and finding ways to work collaboratively with people both in and outside of the academy, because so much of the knowledge that I experience should never be held by only 1 or 2 people. And I see the value in more Niue hands holding the taonga that generations before us have provided. And it should not be inaccessible to any Niue person, whether they are a researcher or not. I'm incredibly grateful to the people that I get to work alongside and the grace they have for me as someone who is also still learning. Yes, we definitely need more Niue researchers doing Niue research, but we also need to interrogate the colonial and imperial systems and structures that simultaneously exploit and create barriers for Niue research and researchers. If I can close with one thing, it's how important it has been to have my research from Pacific studies and in the humanities. Niue stories, flourishing Niue futures, can only be realized with clear and strategic investment in spaces like the humanities, in departments like Taonga Niue, in education and research that centers Niue storytelling, history, identity, philosophy, arts and performance, ways of knowing and being, investment in us as people who are capable of telling our own stories in our own ways.
Well, lahi, Jess, thank you very much. I've noted in the chat Niue knowledge as a theme for our future discussions. Well, lahi, fantastic. Pleasure now to invite Dr. Leroy Tatui to share with us his thoughts. Leroy is the chief dentist on the island. Did his undergraduate at the Fiji School of Medicine, and in fact did a master's of leadership at our place. You chose wisely, Leroy, and I know Jude was one of your tutors. So thank you very much. It's a pleasure to have you with us. So over to you. And then after that, we'll double back and look at what we can cover by way of a Q&A. Wailahi, Leroy.
All right, just checking audio before I start. Can you hear me?
Echoes badly. Start again.
Yeah, fala here to everyone, and warm Niue greetings to you all that are joining us today. It's a true privilege to be here today, and before I dive into my presentation, I'd just like to express my sincere gratitude to those that have been played a vital part in this journey. So Colin, Professor Jude, and the team, and also Director Minerva. Jude and Minerva both know that research is not my thing. I mentioned to them that, yeah, it's not really my cup of tea. So thanks, your push has come into a shove, and now I'm here in this space. It's a real pleasure to be able to present this paper. In particular, I want to acknowledge Professor Vili Nosa and our colleague Nafanu Pili, who have been instrumental in collaborating with me on this paper. I want to thank them in particular because as a dentist, and knowing oral health is not prominent in research or in work in the Pacific, I admire the dedication to advancing oral health research in Niue and the Pacific. So I really hope our collective efforts will help close the research gap in this area and bring greater focus to Niue's health needs. I also like to give my special thanks to my team as well. Without their support and perseverance, this paper would not have been possible. So yeah, next slide, please, Louis. So my interest in research came from when I did my master's in the University of Auckland with Jude and Professor Vili. It was an applied coursework, and I didn't want to do the research stream, but they both pushed me to translate that piece of work into a research paper. At that time, Professor Vili and I were discussing about data that was available in Niue and an opportunity to collaborate and get published. And then came the idea of using dental annual reports that we had in Niue as a starter for a publication. So the research project we had then, the main aim was to understand the current state of oral health in Niue and to see areas that we needed to improve on, especially on oral health outcomes. So the two objectives or the two key parts of this research project was the literature review. And this was to gain a general understanding of oral health issues across the Pacific. The second part, the main one, was the document analysis. And that was to examine the dental services in Niue and position them within the context of the broader Pacific Island countries from the annual reports. All these findings were synthesized to produce the written report, which was ultimately peer-reviewed and submitted for publication. Yeah, next slide. So the literature review involved a scan for articles that mainly sourced from the Google Scholar and Medline Ovid from Pacific Island countries and research revolving around dental work or oral health. That narrowed it down to 20 articles from 1969 to 2018. And if you can see, there's relatively little for oral health in terms of the articles available out there. Next slide. The common themes we picked up from the literature review was firstly, the prevalence of disease, which focused a lot on dental caries and periodontal disease. The second theme we picked up was existing interventions or efforts that help address or combat these issues. And finally, we identified the third theme as barriers to success and challenges and how we can use those to improve the situation. So overall, the first theme of the prevalence of diseases, the issue of dental caries and periodontal disease, they were both identified as the most significant oral health challenges in the Pacific region. Dental caries, as we all know, are as tooth decay of cavities. They occur when bacteria produce acid and erode the protective tooth surfaces or structure. And this is often measured using the DMFT index, which looks at the decayed, missing, or number of field teeth a person or child has. So from the literature review, we picked up from the Cook Islands paper that while only 12% of 5-year-olds in Rarotonga had experienced some sort of tooth decay, there was a higher number, approximately 100% amongst those that are 15-year-olds that had dental caries as well. So this shows how the rapid rise of dental caries as children ages. And dental caries, if not treated, can lead to plenty of difficulties. Chewing can affect their nutrition and eating habits, and far-reaching social consequences as well. The literature also points out to globalization as a major driver of increasing dental caries, particularly the shift from the traditional diets to westernized diets. Pacific Islanders now consume more energy-dense food and nutrition-poor foods, which is a major key factor in the rising rates of dental decay. For periodontal disease, there was less research that focused on periodontal or gum disease in the Pacific, although they do pose a significant risk that includes tooth surface loss, tooth loss, cardiovascular disease, respiratory issues, and adverse pregnancy outcomes. So yeah, next slide. For the second theme of the literature review, we picked up a number of existing interventions across the Pacific, mainly in Tonga, Palau, and Niue. In Tonga, the Mali Mali program is a toothbrushing and fluoride rinse program they have in the primary schools, and showed successful outcomes where they managed to reduce the DMFT score from, I think it was around 4 to 2. So it showed how successful their programs were. In Niue, we had also implemented the Atuhoma Mali program as part of the Niue Oral Health Strategic Plan that was introduced in 2015. And this focuses on integrating oral health education into universal health coverage and targets children at the preschool level or kindergartens before they started school. Because before that, we picked up that while our program was involving the schools only, there was a high number of caries amongst the 5-year-olds. So we shifted the focus in our programs to involve preschool children at the kindergarten, the creche, the ECE, and we also integrated our services with the maternal child health care here at the hospital and their families or their carers. Despite some of these challenges, there's some stigma around lunchbox choices or how parents prepare lunches or what they put in the kids' lunchbox. This was an important step for us in targeting that sort of dynamics, not directly children, but creating that rapport with the carers of the children, including facilitators of the kindergartens and early childhood centers. So there we established that children with decayed teeth, there were early warning systems for other NCDs later on in life. And that's what led us to target them at an early age. And we understand that there has been some link between oral health and NCDs. There is evidence out there that suggests this link. However, there was little integration in how we can manage them. So more evaluation is needed on these programs to establish that link more. Yeah, next slide. So the recommendations for improvement, according to the literature, focuses mainly on the surveillance and monitoring system. I think it was all across the Pacific region. Health information systems and monitoring and evaluation capabilities were chronically underdeveloped. The second issue was that of human resource. The professional development and training for oral health staff was limited, and opportunities that were hardly any. The healthy public policies or legislations within the different governments, they vary, and the lack of support towards policy that could encourage oral health seeking behavior or better outcomes. And also there was a recommendation for a more collaborative approach, which I will touch on again later. Yeah, next slide, please, Louis. So the main part of the the research project was the document analysis. Now, this analysis revealed several challenges. It was a review of the dental reports from the dental clinic in Niue. And this follows the basic standard formatting of annual reports in Niue. Notably, there were no dental reports or annual reports at the Niue Hospital before 2011. So when I started working, we got into the system where we routinely reported on an annual basis the clinical output or operations we had at the clinics, and including the oral health findings we had from the school checks. So Professor Vili and I, including the whanua, we decided that our scope was on 2011 to 2018, reporting on clinical data, the key challenges, achievements, and recommendations. So from the analysis in general, it was a mainly descriptive data, and it showed that dental caries in the clinic was the leading cause for tooth extractions, and particularly among primary school students, where 60% of students had untreated dental caries. It was important to note from the annual reports that there was a gender gap in dental visits, with men attending the clinic less often than women. So this underutilization by men remains a consistent issue over the 7 years. Next slide, please. Okay. So the table showed these sort of trends from our services, right from 2011 to 2018. And it showed that the program has improved a bit in terms of the DMFT scores of the primary school children. We managed a reduction of at least 1 from an average score of 4.4 to 3.5. The data showed that caries was more prevalent amongst primary school kids, whereas high school students experience low rate of dental caries, presumably because of our referral processes after school checks to the clinics for them to get treatment. Next slide, please. The challenges, according to the document analysis, were common amongst the whole health system in Niue. It highlights issues with our health information systems and the specific need for robust and data collection systems. For the oral health reporting, the MedTech software that we use as a health information system was not designed for dental practice. So we were both going on a manual and computer-based system, and it's a huge barrier to data collection and analysis for the team. Similarly, there was a lack of monitoring and evaluation capability for us to monitor trends in knowing. If you can refer to the previous slide, it only showed descriptive data. So we were hugely lacking in the qualitative side of things. Other issues include a lack of biomedical engineer to cater for the regular maintenance and upkeep of our equipment. The turnover time for sourcing this sort of help will take more than a year or two. So that shows sometimes how it can impact the flow of services at the dental clinic. There was a delay, there was an issue with delay in procurement processes, and that is across the board due to government procedures. While it can be a bit frustrating to understand at times, review of this can be enhanced to improve our service delivery. There were technical difficulties for data collection by the team due to the ability and capacity of the local staff to carry out the routine data collection. Oral examination is sort of a challenging exercise in the sense that it requires a lot of resources and time, including skill and proper calibration of the practitioner or the oral examiner. So, yeah, recommendations. Next slide, please. We picked up the 4 recommendations based on the literature and aligned it with the document analysis. And what it showed, monitoring and surveillance systems can hugely be improved. It needs to have regular detailed data collection, and this is crucial for assessing and managing oral health progress in Niue. Although some data exists, we do not have consistent reporting, which makes it very tricky to track the oral health trends. There's a huge need for training programs, especially tailored training programs to address the diverse needs of our patients. This should take into account the specific population or demographics and challenges that we face here in Niue. Okay, I think I should. For healthy public policies, I think the government should implement more public health policies that address the common risk factors for oral diseases and NCDs. One of the huge lessons we learned from this is our water-only policy that we have sort of engaged with the kindergartens and the creche to try and implement. So we're hoping that as a next line of work. In collaboration, lastly, there's an opportunity here for us at the hospital, which is already working for sectorial collaboration. The dental clinic in Niue is located within one hospital, and this positions us in a good opportunity for other disciplines to work together to address oral health issues with continuity of care, oral health through the life course of a patient, and care pathways. As we all know, the risk factors are the same as the major NCDs, such as poor nutrition, tobacco use, a high sugar intake. So it will make sense for us to come together and deliver an integrated care model. Okay. Yeah, next slide. I'll try and wrap things up pretty quick. So yes, one of my biggest takeaway from this research project is that local knowledge is very, very important in research. How it can shape outcomes and create meaningful change, especially in the fields such as healthcare and other public services. We often overlook the importance of lived experiences and contextual understanding of the locals. So this opportunity, Research for Niue by Niue, highlights how local knowledge can, whether you're a health professional, a public servant, a public service provider, a patient, or from the community, we all hold value in the research process. So this is also highlights how collaboration is really important, and I'm thankful for the University of Auckland through Sir Colin, Professor Jude for this opportunity. Fostering this collaboration with an established research institution, it brings in the expertise and the resources that us here in Niue lack, and therefore it enables us to be able to address the research gaps here in Niue. From personal experience, the mentorship from colleagues that enabled me to assist throughout the research process and open up opportunities to broader research, not overseas, but within the region. I was fortunate enough to be working on other papers, although not a really core research, but viewpoints. And it extended the impact of our work locally beyond the local setting. I think one of the papers I contributed to was printed in the Lancet, and that to me was a huge win professionally, but also for oral health in the Pacific. Lastly, to ensure long-term sustainability in research in Niue, I think it's imperative that we have to engage with the local staff. Our discussions around that I've been emphasizing a lot on that. In the sense that we are research aware, we just need to be more research active here in Niue. And of course, we also need the funding to be able to undertake this research. I think it's important at different levels, whether you're an individual, an organization, but more importantly for Niue all across. If we can share and transfer our knowledge for Niue by Niue. And with that, yes, I end my presentation.
Fantastic. Thank you. You've shown what routinely collected material can be used for knowledge creation. Thank you very much for Oilemak. We have unfortunately run out of time, but perhaps if there are pressing questions, we'll take a couple. Just to say that, in fact, a number of topics, potential topics, have been raised this evening. And make sure that we have your email because we're going to try to figure out what the next topic might be. Data sovereignty stands out. Research ethics was identified before the webinar. Niue knowledge, what is it and how do we nurture and so on. I think there was reference from a person at WHO about strengthening research and evaluation capabilities for Niue. Number of topics that we'll come back to you on for future seminars. I guess from our point of view, we're happy to have brought it to this point, and I want to thank all the speakers. I understand the minister may be online. We want to thank you for your contribution at the beginning. Thank you to Jude, to Minerva, to Jess, and Leroy go for Leroy, thank you. Lei, are there any questions that I've missed on the chat? For those who haven't referred to the chat, there's been some very interesting information and discussion in the chat as well. From here on in, we'll come back to you all on when we might host the next session and what the topic will be. I don't, there's a question here from, I assume that you guys, Minerva Malolosino, is there a list of current research related to Niue? There's no list as such, as far as I'm aware, but clearly it can be done. Collation can be done. We know what we have at the University of Auckland, but we wouldn't necessarily know what happens elsewhere. Clearly something that can be done, but as I say, we'll come back to you all on what the next topic might be and when that would happen. Minister, do you want to say anything? I know you've just put an entry in the chat. Oh, there you are. Olafatu.
Yes. Yeah, Olafatu. And yes, Paula, I wasn't sure if I was going to make it. And that was why I did send through a recording. Thank you to all the speakers. There's, as I had said earlier, there's so much knowledge out there, but it's our ability to bring it all together, and it's also to see the gaps. And like we've said throughout the seminar, no one knows Niue like we do and the work that we need. So thank you everyone so much for your contributions and attendance of the seminar. I look forward to more, actually. That's what I was going to say. I do look forward to having more of these chats and raising awareness of our people. I think that's really important for us to take forward.
Thank you for joining us and always supporting these events that we put on. There was, just lastly, there was a question from someone about the focus of this. Clearly, the interest is broader than just health. And that's where we're heading. You will see from Jess that it's beyond health. But we are health people. It's what we know, and that's where we start. But where we're going is about Niue knowledge, about educational achievement, about taonga, about environment, about climate. It's all, and in any case, health is not an isolated thing. All of these things have a bearing on health. So to answer the question from that person, yes, it's been brought together by health. We've already contacted Jess's colleagues about broadening this endeavor. So starting with health, looking forwards to a broader, it's about protecting, nurturing, affirming, celebrating Niue knowledge broadly. That's where we're heading, but start small. So whakawelahi to all of you, especially to you, Minister, safe travels home. Whakawelahi to the speakers and all of you, of course, who've joined us on this webinar. Thank to Nale, Lois, and the team at Taupoko for bringing this all together. Mafole afiafi, Whakamunuina he atua tautolu osi, whakawelahi mahaki ki he umai am tolu ke whakatutala, tautolu e tauranga matai mo tau purotu ne lata mo motu, whakawelahi ki a Minerva mo Koima Leroy. Whamawhane kauhamua he health ke kauwhakalataha mai. We'll look forward to joining you all again. Thank you very much, everyone. To look.